Namaskar and thanks for joining us on our weekly business and economy related current affairs program, The Economic Brief. On the program, November 2025 exports jumped 19% to $38.1 billion. Engineering and electronics lead the rebound. China hits $1 trillion trade surplus. The IMF warns that China's export reliance, it risks global tensions amid imbalances. The EU softens 2035 car ban. It lets petrol and diesel stay with offsets amid EV slowdown and China competition. And the US imposes total blockade on Venezuela oil tankers. Trump labels it as a terror sponsor. Markets react. Experts warn of rising tensions. To put our first story into context, let's listen to Prime Minister Narendra Modi highlighting India's remarkable economic momentum. He was speaking in Muscat at the India-Oman Business Forum, and against a backdrop of global uncertainty, he underscored how India continues to grow at 8%, crediting not just policy reforms, but what he called a fundamental transformation of the nation's economic DNA. Here's what he had to say.
आज बिजनेस वर्ल्ड में भारत की इकोनॉमी की रेजिलियंस की चर्चा होती है। लोग अक्सर पूछते हैं कि दुनिया में इतनी अनिश्चितता है, ग्लोबल इकोनॉमी भी मुश्किलों में है, तो ऐसे में भारत 8% से अधिक की ग्रोथ कैसे अचीव कर रहा है? मैं आपको इसका बड़ा रीजन बताता हूं। असल में बीते 11 वर्षों के दौरान भारत ने सिर्फ पॉलिसी नहीं बदली है, भारत ने अपना इकोनॉमिक डीएनए बदला है।
And to look a little deeper at that economic DNA and what is actually happening, we can take a look at exports in the month of November. So we see that exports jumped 19.37% to $38.13 billion. This is a strong rebound following October's contraction. And some of the reasons are that, this fact is the highest in 3 years. Shipments have been rising also to other areas. So it's not only a one market kind of a situation. Shipments have been rising even to China, to Europe. And they've taken advantage actually of a depreciating rupee. So strong rebound following October's contraction. Engineering and electronics led the shipments because the rupee has fallen in value, and hence these goods are cheaper for those markets. Moving on to our next slide. So imports have fallen by 1.88% to $62.66 billion, and we've had lower imports of gold, crude oil, coal and coke. So this is the opposite effect of what has happened with the depreciating rupee. Things are more expensive now in terms of rupees, hence there is lower demand. For gold, of course, crude oil and coke, those are things that are required for the energy of the economy. But gold, the prices are high. That's the reason why the demand has come down. Gold imports plunged, in fact, 59.15% to just around $4 billion. Moving on to our next slide. So the trade deficit has narrowed to about $24.53 billion, and that is a significant improvement from the figure of $41.68 billion in October. What we are seeing is a softer import demand, which has helped reduce the deficit, and I've been explaining that to you because of it really is a question of what is the rupee. I mean, there could be advantages as well as some could look at it as disadvantages, but the point is that the rupee value has affected global trade our trade, international trade to some extent, and it has softened our import demand. Now move on to our next slide. The US continues to be the the largest market, the export destination for India. This is despite the 50% tariff, because the US is a huge market. They are high on consumption, and a lot of our exports were driven in that direction. They continue to be driven there despite the tariffs. But of course, the US continues to be a large consumer market. And we are looking at the November. In fact, in November, exports reached their highest level since May of 2025, and the export growth was the fastest since June of 2022. So we are looking at also, because domestic demand is good in our country, our economy is quite strong that way, and we can talk about global integration and trade cycles that are taking place. India is well suited to do this because of various trade deals also, like the one we've made with Oman. Before we move on, let's listen to India's Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal. He's speaking, in fact, at the India-Oman Business Summit. And he said that the CEPA that I just referred to will enable more ambitious trade and provide India greater access to West Asia, Central Europe, and Africa.
The CEPA will act as an enabler of a more ambitious future by offering duty-free access, addressing trade barriers, and simplifying rules. It will allow our exports to be more competitively priced in each other's economies. We invite Omani business persons to leverage India's vibrant market, while Indian businesses will find Oman as a strategic gateway to the Gulf, Africa, and West Asia. The comprehensive economic partnership would facilitate greater market access for our professionals and firms, supporting Oman's Vision 2040.
So Rahul Gupta, who tracks international trade very closely, joins us now, and he gives us his take on what's happening. Rahul, what does the November export surge mean? Led by engineering and electronics. What does it signal about India's, let's say, manufacturing competitiveness? And can India also sustain high-value exports in the face of global tariffs?
Well, I believe that the price alignment has already taken place. The tariffs had been there. Renegotiations between the customers and suppliers from India has already taken place. Rupee revaluation by another 5-6%, which has happened in last 2-3 months, that has really impacted well positively. The goods have become cheaper in international market, the ones which I guess getting exported from India. The increase in prices, as you rightly pointed out, that imports have reduced. The gold prices, when it's increasing our valuation as to country, as to our reserve with central bank, as well as with the people at large, that has led to a reduction in the imports. But gold imports, I don't see reducing in the future context. The reason being the dollar is swapping to gold in various central bank reserves. So I believe prices of gold will keep rising and there will be imports. But exports, I believe the way we are entering into multiple FTAs with multiple countries, the customer broadening, the way it is happening through the FTAs is really taking a lead. The government, instead of asking only exporters, government has signed multiple FTAs, and as it's a happy day today that the government has signed another FTA with Oman.
Yes.
So expanding the customer base by adding countries as friend partners is a great leap into the thought process. It has changed the thought process for businesses. Otherwise, a single country getting flagged in any part of the year with a separate agreement makes businesses realize that, okay, you must see this market. It's a market where you have a free access now for your products. So Oman, India, there's a lot of export to UAE, to Dubai. A lot of trading happening through UAE, to Africa even.
Yes.
But now the Oman adding up, GCC countries getting added up. So GCC countries is a great opportunity. They are 5 times, 6 times the income group, average income than us, and the populations are almost half of us. So that's a big market, a great market for future.
Okay.
And with GCC countries, I believe there'll be more GCC countries coming in.
So, Mr. Gupta, but you were saying that imports of gold are likely not to, that the fall is not going to last for long. And also crude imports have also come down. That also is transitional for a little while. But, this has helped the trade deficit narrow. So that means that we are going to be concerned about the trade deficit going forward. Is that expected to impact also India's industrial demand, long-term trade strategy?
See, I believe the gold imports is always a momentary problem, it's a short-term problem, but the gold prices increasing from 30,000 to 1,30,000. So whatever imports we made in last 25, 30 years,
It's
the valuation
appreciated.
has gone four, five times.
Yes.
So there's a government scheme called gold monetization and gold deposit scheme, wherein
Right.
government promotes banks to take deposits in the form of gold instead of borrowing the foreign exchange from international market. So that scheme, I believe government will push the moment government has to balance out the imports. So it'll help us be borrowing less of dollars and borrowing gold from within the country. So it'll automatically balance more imports being there of gold, will be countered with we borrowing not the dollars but gold from within India.
So you're saying our reserves of gold have strengthened so much in terms of valuation that will
Yes.
help deal with the deficit. But let's do stay with us, Mr. Rahul Gupta. We'll move on to our next story about China, and we'll come back to you on this story as well. China has posted its first ever $1 trillion trade surplus, a milestone that is sparking global concern. While Beijing, it hails this achievement, critics are saying that it underscores an economy increasingly dependent on exports at the expense of emerging markets. The IMF has cautioned that such reliance risks fueling fresh trade tensions as Europe and developing nations are bracing for what some analysts are calling a second China shock. Here's the report. China recorded its first ever $1 trillion trade surplus in November, drawing criticism that its slowing economy relies on dominating global supply chains and flooding emerging markets with cheap goods diverted from the US due to President Donald Trump's tariffs. The IMF chief warned China is too large to sustain growth through exports alone, cautioning that continued dependence risks escalating global trade tensions.
As the second largest economy in the world, China is simply too big to generate much growth from exports, and continuing to depend on export-led growth risks furthering global trade tensions.
Despite tariffs imposed by Washington, which cut Chinese exports to America by nearly a third in November, China has found new markets. Shipments to Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America have surged, raising alarms in Europe. Industries from automobiles to luxury goods now face fierce competition from Chinese rivals.
Since the beginning of this year, the threat of tariffs has been brandished across the globe, with various trade restrictions proliferating and severely disrupting the world economy. As the situation unfolds, the mutually detrimental consequences of tariffs have become increasingly evident, while calls for the preservation of free trade have grown ever more insistent.
China's Statistics Bureau says it has adopted proactive policies to boost demand, upgrade industry, and spur growth. Europe, meanwhile, urges China to add value instead of flooding markets with cheap goods. Some leaders consider Trump-style tariffs, while others seek a truce.
Europeans want economic cooperation with China. We do not shy away from competition, but it must be based on rules and be fair. We hear that the Chinese side fully understands this. We know that we need to increase our competitiveness. But our Chinese counterparts also know that the European Commission closely monitors the competitive environment and must always reserve the right to take action itself.
Analysts warn of a looming second China shock. The first hit Western factories as production shifted to China. The next may hit developing nations as cheap Chinese exports overwhelm local industries in places like Indonesia, Thailand, and Malaysia. China's domestic demand remains weak. and its reliance on export signals deepening global imbalances. This is a warning that both developed and developing economies may face another disruptive shock. The Economic Brief, DD India. So Rahul Gupta, international trade expert, continues to be with us. Mr. Gupta, how does China's record $1 trillion trade surplus show the structural weaknesses on the demand side in their country, domestic demand down? What risks does this actually pose for global supply chains?
See, I believe the dumping, China is selling cheaper goods, and they have got multiple ways how they subsidize the business and the pricing of the product. So this dumping methodology, is good for a start to enter into a market. Whereas once you keep supplying at such pricing at the dumping prices, then you can't sustain. So I believe it's only for entering into new markets after US having heavy duties for the Chinese goods. To enter the new markets, they've done that, and which will be surely attracted at the initial stages. But once you keep supplying and balance out the prices, then the demand is only momentary. So I believe this dumping strategy is not a long-term proposition, how it will sustain this way. And now every country understands that if they allow their domestic industry to close down, then even when the goods become expensive from the supplying country, they have to sustain. So I don't think they'll close down, or the domestic manufacturing in those countries, they have to sustain for a while, or maybe these countries, they come up with the anti-dumping duties, etc. This is the only way they'll balance out, because this is how China in the year of 2000s, even at the start, Y2K times, had started doing with India and the other countries. They started supplying the goods cheap, and initially, and so that they expected that the factories should close down in the consuming countries. US was a different situation. US and those countries, they have very high operational cost, a very high overhead. So they can't, they would always, the Chinese goods will always be cheaper for them. Whereas for developing nations, they are able to manufacture at a competitive prices. So dumping variations, they can sustain for 6 months or a year, and then it will automatically balance out. I don't see that the China strategy, as what was there on Western Europe and US, will be similar in case of developing countries or African countries. India would surely have an edge. India may not dump initially and then balance out the prices in the future. Indian industries will keep supplying at a stagnant pricing, and our rupee revaluation by another 5-6% in last 6 months has already made our goods competitively cheaper. But yes, we are not like the way other competitor in China is doing.
Indeed, but China does have a $1 trillion surplus in the month of November. But what sectors and regions are most vulnerable to a second China shock if it does take place? And how is this expected also to reshape, let's say, industrial competitiveness? You were mentioning that other countries will sort of react. India, of course, has already factored these things in with Atmanirbharta and things like that. But the point is, worldwide, how will industry react to sort of get into competition? We heard the EU gentleman saying that they have the right to watch competition, and they will decide to stop Chinese goods from coming in if they are not competitive.
So that's what I was trying to say. EU was sounding about the anti-dumping only, as a matter of fact. They felt that if they'll keep dumping, they have to balance out the pricing by specific. And I believe initially it will be electronics, which will be an important sector world over, which has to take corrective actions, because electronics, China has been always in the last 25 years, they've been reducing because of economies of scale by adding more and more markets by dumping goods. And I believe that will be the first threat across the globe, which has to balance out. But as being on Indian diaspora, when all the schemes of government which have been started in the last 5-7 years, I believe government is now focusing on implementing those schemes. Even lately, what government has added the export incentives like subvention and like easy loans by virtue of CGT, SME and all those schemes. I think in just implementation would improve these things. Implementation will counterbalance the dumping coming from China. The implementation will have duo market for us, because our domestic market is robust and growing. Being in a pyramid-based society, we still have not reached the stage where our large strata of the lower pyramid third tier level has started consuming the goods which have still having huge potential. So I believe the moment it is the time where our third tier level of pyramid is also moving up the ladder.
Okay.
Huge consumption is going to come up, which in China is already it's
Fair
over the
enough.
phase.
They have saturated that level.
Saturated the level.
Yes, we
And
leave
we
it
are
there.
entering into that phase.
Okay.
And I believe our economies of scale is on the cards now. With the government promoting export side and our domestic market of the third tier level coming in, the numbers of the for consumption will be so huge for the times to come, another 5 to 10 years, that economies of scale will be able to bail us out on the part of dumping as well as for sustaining the manufacturing. And government has gone left, right, center to support people, whether it is land, for raw material pricing, for finance, and for technology. Everywhere government is trying that all 4, 5 facets are being taken care for manufacturing.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Mr. Rahul Gupta. Thank you for putting that into context for us and also highlighting how India stands to gain from all this. Now, moving on to our next story, Europe's green transition is hitting a moment of reckoning. The European Union is reworking its landmark plan to end petrol and diesel cars by 2035, easing rules as the automakers are struggling with slowing electric vehicle demand and also fierce competition from China. At stake, climate ambition, industrial survival, and millions of jobs. Diptanshu Kashyap reports.
The European Union is easing its climate strategy. Brussels has decided not to fully ban new petrol and diesel cars by 2035, recalibrating its approach as the auto industry struggles with slowing electric vehicle demand and intensifying competition from Chinese manufacturers.
Europe is reaffirming its decarbonization course for the automotive sector by 2035. It's a clear target, maintained and fully embraced. However, the calculation methods are changing. The flexibilities we are introducing do not call this objective into question. Any potential additional emissions generated by these flexibilities will have to be fully offset upfront, and these flexibilities will notably apply to 10% of emissions by 2035.
The revised framework allows manufacturers to rely on offset mechanisms, including cleaner fuels, industrial credits, and low-carbon materials to balance remaining vehicle emissions. The policy shift follows a slower-than-expected transition to electric mobility. Battery-powered cars accounted for just over 16% of new vehicle sales in the first 9 months of 2025, raising concerns that the original timeline was commercially unrealistic. EU officials say the move is designed to protect a sector that supports nearly 14 million jobs and generates around 7% of the bloc's GDP, even as environmental groups warn it could delay full electrification.
The goal remains the same, but the flexibilities are pragmatic given consumer uptake and the difficulty for manufacturers to offer 100% electric by 2035. The European Commission has chosen an approach that is both pragmatic and consistent with its climate objectives and ambitions.
For now, Brussels insists that it has not changed its climate destination, but the route to get there. The revised rules still keep 2035 as the benchmark for decarbonizing Europe's car sector, but with added flexibility to help consumers and manufacturers adjust. Whether that compromise preserves jobs without slowing the shift to electric vehicles will now be watched closely by manufacturers, lawmakers, and climate groups alike. In New Delhi with camera person Sunil Kumar, this is Diptanshu Kashyap for the Economic Brief, DD India.
Well, oil, power and geopolitics are colliding in the Caribbean. The United States has ordered a sweeping blockade of sanctioned oil tankers linked to Venezuela, sending shockwaves through global energy markets and also raising fears of a fresh geopolitical flashpoint. With oil prices reacting, legal questions mounting and Caracas vowing resistance, this is no longer just a political dispute. It is, in fact, a high-stakes battle over energy and influence. Diptanshu Kashyap explains, and we leave you with his report. Thank you very much for watching the Economic Brief this week. See you again next week. Namaskar.
The United States has ramped up pressure on Venezuela, ordering a total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers entering or leaving the country. President Donald Trump has labeled Venezuela a foreign terrorist organization, warning that the massive naval and military presence in the Caribbean, including an aircraft carrier, will remain until Caracas returns what he calls stolen US assets. Oil markets reacted immediately, climbing over 1% as fears mount over sharply reduced Venezuelan exports, while legal experts question the blockade's authority and warn of escalating regional tensions.
Una gran protesta.
We tell the people of the United States our truth, and it is very clear. Imperialism and the Nazi fascist right wing want to colonize Venezuela to take our wealth oil, gas, gold, iron, aluminium, and other minerals. We have sworn to defend our homeland, and in Venezuela, peace will always prevail along with stability and shared happiness for our people. To the people of the United States, we say again and again, 1 in 1,000 times.
No blood for oil. No war for oil.
The blockade threatens Venezuela's economic lifeline. The country sits on 303 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, with December exports to China expected to exceed 600,000 barrels per day. More than 30 of the roughly 80 vessels near Venezuela are now under US sanctions, while a recent cyber attack disrupted state-run PDVSA operations. Oil markets reacted sharply. Brent crude rose 1.2% to $59.62 a barrel. WTI climbed 1.3% to $56, and analysts warn that a loss of nearly 1 million barrels per day could push prices $5 to $8 higher, stoking inflation and regional instability.
Cuba denounces and condemns this return to gunboat diplomacy, this threatening diplomacy, this scandalous theft. One more in the already long list of looting of Venezuelan state assets. It is unacceptable interference in the internal affairs of a nation that set the course for the independence of America.
With the blockade in effect, Venezuela faces mounting economic and political pressure. Crude exports have already plunged, threatening nearly 1 million barrels per day. While Trump frames the move as a fight against terrorism and asset theft, Maduro paints it as imperialist aggression and vows to defend the nation's wealth. Experts warn the standoff could further destabilize the region, drive oil prices higher, and deepen humanitarian challenges. A high-stakes confrontation where energy, power, and politics collide.
The US-Venezuela standoff is more than just a fight over oil. It's a clash of politics, power, and global markets. Washington's blockade could disrupt nearly 1 million barrels per day, pushing prices higher, while Caracas vows to defend its resources. The ripple effects will be felt from Caracas to Washington and across the world. In New Delhi with camera person Sunil Kumar, this is Dipanshu Kashyap for the Economic Brief, DD India.